Hi, welcome to the screencast for skin. This is, I believe, chapter 5. We are starting right off actually with an important chunk of information, the 6 functions of the integumentary system, or the skin. This is one of your possible open-ended essay-style questions, and it does require explanation or description, not simply a list of the functions. So do please spend some time on this and commit it to memory. First up is protection. Now, under protection, you don't need to be able to list all of this. You just need to be able to say chemical, physical, and biological protection. This is too much information to commit to memory. But for the true-false multiple choice stuff, you want to know these details down here. So the chemical protection, as this says here, includes low pH secretions, and what's supposed to go in this little blank there is the acid mantle. So low pH means acid. So you just have some chemicals on your skin that bacteria don't like very much. Your skin also prevents just a simple physical barrier. Right, you have an epithelium in between the outside world and the connective tissue and blood vessels of your dermis. You then also have biological barriers, which includes cells and chemicals embedded in the skin. Number 2, or function 2, is body temperature regulation. So there are 2 forms of regulation, or 2 methods by which your skin helps you regulate your body temperature. First is sweating, which we already went over. And then the other is regulation of blood flow. To understand this, the way it works is that if you are warm, the blood vessels that feed your skin vasodilate, or they get bigger. That sends more blood to your skin and sends the heat from your core radiating out into the world around you. If you're cold, those blood vessels are going to constrict, and then you're going to keep more of your blood, and therefore more of your heat, closer in towards the core of your body. Your skin also gives you sensation, so you have receptors in your skin for things like temperature, touch, and pain. Fourth, your skin provides a metabolic function. So there are some enzymes that, along with energy from the sun in the form of UV light, aid in the form of a vitamin D precursor. So this is why sometimes vitamin D is called the sunshine vitamin. So its energy from UV light is used to break and rearrange some bonds in a molecule that is going to become vitamin D. Your skin can also serve as a blood reservoir, so up to 5%, as this says right here, of your body's blood can be stored in your skin. The reason for this is that your blood volume can go up and down to a certain degree with your hydration state, but you don't want your blood pressure to spike every time you chug a glass of water, and you don't want your blood pressure to necessarily plummet when you get dehydrated. So your body's got extra blood vessels or more vascular capacity than it needs, where it can store blood so that your blood volume, or your blood pressure, I should say, doesn't plummet whenever your blood volume does. And then excretion, specifically what your body excretes is nitrogenous waste and salt that come out in the sweat. Now, nitrogen, you remember, is one of the components of proteins. Any proteins that you don't use to, and I should say, let me back up. Amino acids contain nitrogen, and amino acids are used to make proteins. Any proteins which you ingest and then break down into amino acids, if you don't use all of the amino acids that you eat to build your own proteins, then they are burned for energy or converted into fat, and there's no room for nitrogen in the machinery in your mitochondria or in adipose tissue or fat, so the nitrogen has to be gotten rid of. So it does come out to a certain degree in your sweat, but that being said, you don't have to sweat to get rid of nitrogen. If you don't sweat, it doesn't mean that nitrogen builds up in your body. At any rate, we will move on. So please do know those and commit them to memory. They will be on the next exam. A great big possible 12-point question. So then we get into the skin itself, which consists of, as this says here, 3 layers, which you're already aware of: the epidermis, dermis, and the hypodermis. As shown here, again, epidermis, dermis, and hypodermis. We already went over this in lab. So what we're going to do in here is we're going to go through all the different layers of the epidermis. And as we go through the layers, we're going to identify these different cell types here and go over their function. So this just outlines all of the cells that you need to know. And I should point out, I don't know that I place them in one specific layer, but you should know that the keratinocytes are the one cell type that you find in every layer of the epidermis. So we are starting down here in what is called the stratum basale, or the basal layer. So this is the lowermost layer of the epidermis. It is sometimes called the stratum germinativum. If something germinates, it grows and gets bigger, and these cells are the cells that are undergoing mitosis. So they're keratinocytes primarily that undergo mitosis, and they then produce all of the other cells that are going to migrate up through the layers as they age and then die and fall off the top of the skin there. You will also find interspersed among the mitotically active keratinocytes some melanocytes that produce the melanin, as well as Merkel cells or tactile cells. These are not to be confused with your tactile corpuscles. They perform a very similar function, only they're different. We know this because they're located in the epidermis, and the tactile corpuscles are located in the papillary layer of the dermis. All right, so the next layer up is the stratum spinosum, and you'll notice I just moved this over and edited it a little to make it more simple. So there are 2 things you want to know about the stratum spinosum. One is that this is where the melanin actually accumulates. So it's produced in the stratum basale, but it accumulates 1 layer higher in the stratum spinosum. So it acts kind of like a shade umbrella on a hot day. You don't want the melanin to stay in the melanocytes that are down next to the dividing cells. You want the melanin to be above them so that it can shield them from the sun. You will also find hanging out, in the stratum spinosum, macrophages that are called dendritic cells or Langerhans cells. And I did put their function here if you go all the way back. Do know that Langerhans cells are macrophages. So this means they are phagocytes. They engulf and kill bacteria, or they can clean up dead skin cells after a wound or something. So again, they used to be called Langerhans cells, but now they're generally called dendritic cells. Then we're going to go 1 more layer up there to the stratum granulosum. It is named for the lemulated granules which it contains. So these are a combination of protein and fat, so it's sort of a weird substance. But what it does is make a lipid-like tough water barrier. So you still evaporate from your skin. Even if you're not sweating, you're always losing water, but having the stratum granulosum reduces what is called obligate water loss, or the amount of evaporation from your skin. Then we go 1 more layer up, and your book doesn't have a good picture of it, so I stole this from whatever OUHSC is. It is called the stratum lucidum, which means the clear or light layer. Right? So if you say somebody is lucid, this means they are clear-headed. So the stratum lucidum is the clear layer. You only find it in thick skin because it is the layer that you find in between the stratum granulosum and the stratum corneum, when you have a thick, abundant stratum corneum that you would have in thick skin as opposed to thin skin. And that's all just keratinocytes, as is the stratum corneum is just, as this says here, 20 to 30 cells deep of dead keratinized keratinocytes. And keratinized means the cell is dead, all the water's been taken out of it, and it's basically just an empty husk of a cell with a bunch of keratin inside of it. So it's a lump of protein at this point. And the stratum corneum is there simply for protection. So next up we will go to the dermis, which we covered briefly in lecture. And let's see, we are 12 slides in, we're making good time. So there are two layers to the dermis, the papillary layer and the reticular layer. You need to know what is found in each layer. So if you recall when we did tissues, we said underneath every epithelium is going to be some lamina propria, which is a form of areolar connective tissue that supports the epithelium. So supporting the epidermis of your skin is a layer of lamina propria known as the papillary layer of your skin. This is where you find those bumps called the dermal papillae, and then inside of those bumps you can find your Meissner's or tactile corpuscles. There we go, tactile. We'll edit as we go. And you also have some free nerve endings and whatnot in there, but that's not as important as knowing that those corpuscles are there. Then the next layer down is called the reticular layer. This is made out of a connective tissue called dense irregular connective tissue. It's got a lot of collagen fibers in it, so you basically want to think of it as like a big cargo net or a big web of thick protein fibers that gives your skin some toughness and some structure. It is also the layer of the skin in which you will find all of the glands and follicles. You will learn later that these glands and follicles are actually downgrowths or invaginations from the epidermis, so they're all epithelial tissue, but you find them down in the dermis or the reticular layer of the dermis. I think, what do we have? Just a few more minutes. We can talk about skin color and then we'll stop. But I got to stop these videos at 15 minutes, otherwise I have to start paying for them. Melanin. You want to know that melanin is in your skin. You want to know that it's brown. You want to know that it protects you from UV radiation. So that prevents damage to the DNA, which can then lead to skin cancer. You also want to know that you have some keratin or beta-carotene in your skin. This is some of the same stuff that you find in carrots. This is why they are orange. Don't ask me what it does. It's just there. It's a vitamin. And then hemoglobin as well, which is not technically a pigment for your skin, but because your blood is red due to the hemoglobin and you have ample blood supply in your skin, that is where it gets its pinkish or ruddy red color. So we'll stop there and we'll pick up in the next video with other stuff that you find in the dermis or derivatives of the epidermis.